This morning we are talking with Donna Scarboro, who is the Associate Provost for International Programs at George Washington University. Donna is a past president of AIEA and has been very involved in the organization. And Donna is one of those people who's had the unique opportunity to be for a very long time at an institution where she's been able to genuinely change and shape what international education means for the faculty and the students of that institution. So this will be a very good discussion. Having introduced you that way, Donna, let me ask you a little bit about how you got involved in international education, because as I have said to some others with whom I've spoken, those of us in my generation and in yours came to it when there was no such thing as a profession of international education.
Right, it's very true. In my case, I came from Atlanta, where I was a graduate student at Emory University. I married and moved to Washington and looked for teaching positions. And in that process, I began teaching at GW and started a family. And after about 6 years, I was offered an opportunity to combine my teaching with some administrative responsibility.
And you had come out of a PhD in English Lit.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so I took on those administrative responsibilities and found that to my surprise, I enjoyed it. Made a nice complement to teaching. And part of my responsibility at that time was summer sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And faculty approached me in summer sessions wanting to take students to this or that place. I remember one of the first faculty members wanted to take students to Brussels, and he took 40 because we didn't know better.
Right.
So, we learned a lot of lessons. But I developed a way to budget and monitor and create a proposal process for faculty to do that. And in the process got rather interested in this aspect of work. Eventually, my family and I took a sabbatical and lived in Ireland for a year. And when I came back, because, as you say, in those early days, there were no professional credentials. So having been for 9 months in another country seemed to transform me into a person who should be running the study abroad office.
Right.
And so
right, exactly.
It didn't
yes.
take very much to convince anyone. I had
Right.
the administrative track record. I was interested, obviously, in things international. And so the study abroad office, which was very small at that time and wasn't even open full-time on campus, was removed from an in-school situation where it had been started into a central administration office under me. And when we did that, the growth in study abroad kind of took off. There were a number of things going on all at one time. And so the administrative responsibility for that office grew very rapidly. The participation rate grew very rapidly. And so it soon was one of 11 different reports that I had that was overshadowing everything else. And we, after this went on for several years, realized we needed to clean up my assignment. I dropped many of the other things that I was doing and became focused on international. That took place in the mid-90s.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I had a little bit earlier, but exactly the same experience of a dozen different portfolios, right. And all of a sudden, what a dean had said would take almost none of my time became, had a new baby and I was doing credentials evaluations at 3 in the morning after being awakened. You know?
Yes, exactly.
So I understand. Yeah. And that is how so many people in our career began.
Right.
It really is.
Yep.
So the university itself must have changed to be willing to support getting rid of other responsibilities and focusing in this way. And what had happened there? Why was the university ready?
Yes, well, the big piece of that, and the one that's easiest to explain, is that we had always had a lively international affairs faculty, but they belonged to political science or they belonged to some other department. The Elliott School for International Affairs was eventually carved out and made a standalone school. that was a huge move for the university.
Right.
That was very painful because the departments didn't want to let go of these faculty lines and were very concerned about what that would mean. Eventually it became very clear that it was good for everyone. It was, the faculty who participated in the Elliott School of International Affairs had joint appointments in departments, and they brought so many excellent students with an interest in a variety of subjects that it created opportunities for those departments that had originally given up some control to create new lines and have more people. So we needed more language teachers. We needed more teachers of international politics. We needed more teachers of international law. We needed more teachers of things like conflict resolution. So there was a wonderful momentum on the campus and a shift in the student body. When I think about GW when I first got there in the middle 80s, it had a wonderful, glorious history of being a Washington institution.
Right.
And Washington was a city of a particular character too. All of that began to shift and change, and the university and the city changed together. So Washington is now thought of as an international city.
Mm-hmm.
Our students don't come to us for the most part because they're interested in domestic politics. They may be interested in domestic politics, but they see that as part of world politics. They're always interested in the world and in world politics. So the interest in what was happening in the world and the wish to be well educated and well informed about what was happening in the world came along with the creation of the Elliott School for International Affairs. Mm-hmm. And other things happened that fed this stream. One was that we established what is now a very respected undergraduate program in international business. I mentioned law. International law has become one of the top-rated programs in a top-rated school, so we are really have grown enormously in quality as well as quantity in some of these areas. We now have a master's in international education. So every school of the 10 now has its own identity and activity in things international. But that was seeded and grew out of this period. For my work, where study abroad kind of took up a lot of the headspace I brought to that work, we went from 350 students when I started to now, counting graduate students who are doing capstones and research, it's close to 2,000 people outbound.
Every year.
Yes, every year. And so the activity has really burgeoned. The participation rate of undergraduates is now close to 50%.
That's phenomenal.
And it's phenomenal. And so all of this has kind of come along together. So sometimes I had the sensation doing this work that I was building an airplane while flying it. Mm-hmm. Kind of fun and kind of unnerving. The demand for information, because the online information that was accessible to our students was burgeoning, and so to sort that and stay ahead of that was a huge job. We could no longer simply choose what brochures we were going to put out on a desk. We had to be in front of a lot of information.
Right.
And we had to be able to talk to them about choices that looked good to them online, but that we needed to understand what stood behind that, because everything can look really good on that surface level. So there was a lot of knowledge building that was needed to stay ahead of those things. The other thing that changed dramatically over my working life is the idea of risk management.
I was just thinking that. Yes.
It's so big now, and the expectation that I can get in front of any incident in any part of the world within 10 minutes.
Right.
The competition between the student newspaper and the administration for who learns first what has happened somewhere is a revolutionary change in what we're trying to be responsible for and who we're trying to be responsible to. So that side of the work has also really built in terms of what we need technologically and what kind of staff we have to have. We went through times that you'll remember when people on the Hill really questioned whether we should be sending students out of the country. And we're having hearings about whether it was safe to leave the United States, period, end of statement. And universities like mine and universities all over the world really couldn't stop history and not send our students somewhere.
Right.
So what we had to do was to figure out how to be answerable for that.
Right.
And that's been a huge part of the way that we've had to build our knowledge base.
It's very interesting to me because I know exactly what you're talking about in this trajectory of development. It used to be, I was a one-person office,
Right.
as I'm sure you were as
Right.
well. And that meant I did everything, including not understanding what risk management was as a label, risk management. And now there are, I would say the last 5 years, maybe I'm wrong, dedicated positions
Correct.
solely to risk management.
Right.
And they're not necessarily legal positions. So it used to be the lawyers only
Yeah.
who were dealing with it, which was difficult
Yeah,
because their bent and goal was very difficult from
Correct.
international educators' bent and goal.
correct.
It has changed radically, and I think it's also changed radically in other ways. When I began, the word curriculum integration did not exist. The idea of faculty development did not exist in international education, probably not at all, but it's certainly not in international education. Accreditation institutions did not come into your institution and ask what the outcomes were and exchange. And of course, the politics surrounding inbound students was simply not as controversial because nobody paid attention to it for a very long time, except for periodic moments.
Right.
All of that has transformed the work that people like you do.
Well, and in fact, we glossed over the legal side of it, but that too has really, the demand that we, if I have an employee in Spain, I have to comply with the laws of Spain, and that's a concern to the lawyers at the university in a way that when I started this work, there really wasn't anyone to notice, and we did the best we could, right? And so we figured out how to get people paid. We figured out how to make things fit together, and at this point, any tiny move that happens internationally receives a tremendous amount of scrutiny and discussion.
Right.
And you're right, their goals are to reduce risk. And our goals are to make things happen and to help researchers or students or others get their business done.
Right.
So there is a lot of negotiating around management decisions and legal decisions that have to somehow be dovetailed and that sometimes don't want to be dovetailed at all.
Right, right.
Well, and I think for the side of bringing in students, CVIS is another great example where we have an entire staff of people working on compliance where they used to work on relating to students and figuring
social activities.
Right, and now we're all trying to sort of twist it back around to make sure that we are complying, but that we're not forgetting to reach out to the students.
Right.
But there was a moment there where the vacuum of government compliance took everything we had. And I think that those moments are not over, that universities are going to continue to struggle with this. And it always interests me when I hear sort of criticism of the growth of these positions and administrative work. I don't think that you and I, when we started, wished for that. It's that these expectations and demands...
The law and the environment has required it.
A lot of unfunded mandates, a lot of changes in the expectations of parents and students. And so universities have been trying to underpin, as I say, sort of build the airplane while it's going.
Right.
And that has required that we have people who can pay attention to these things and build expertise so we don't make mistakes.
So if you started as a one-person office, essentially, today, what are the different portfolios under your supervision and what is your staff?
Well, I didn't start as a one-person office.
Okay.
There were two.
Oh, yay! I'm jealous.
But by the time I got into the international, we were 4, with 1 being part-time. So it was minuscule. I now have a study abroad office that has around between 12 and 15 people, depending on how you count. We have some 6 full-time employees abroad. I have 3 positions that are immediately under me, one of which, and that are not study abroad positions, I should say.
Right.
One of which does legal compliance, looking at agreements and helping to move them through the various stations of review that they have to go through and making sure that they get completed. that same person also monitors the system in which we ask our students to tell us where they are so that we can,
Right.
on a given day, run a location search and know if there's someone we need to communicate with. She works with our insurers as well, and with the legal office. A second position works with a group that we call Global Scholars. Those are students who are on our campus because of the sponsorship, and they come from another country. So they may be here because of a foundation or something that's the in-country equivalent of the Fulbright, but we're trying to give those organizations a port of call within the university so
Right.
that they're not reaching out to the cashier's office and the housing office and all the
Right.
various places. So, but I do not do the
Inbound.
broad inbound degree-seeking students. Exchange and these global scholars are sort of pulled out from that large group, which is around 4,000 people. So I work in parallel with the office that does the CVIS work and the...
Which is how many institutions continue to do that.
Right. My institution, I really nudged them for a long time because I live in this world and I know what comprehensive internationalization looks like and what
Right.
it doesn't look like. And so I advocated that we be more comprehensive in our ways of doing this and not make people simply do it at their own level, trying to reach out to each other, but make that part of a structure. And we have now created a better structure that makes that happen. So the president and the provost created a strategic position that now sits across these two areas of work. And that's a perfect way for me to kind of get the leadership in place so that as I step away, the roles are clearer.
Right.
And we can move forward without having all of these disparate
Pieces.
entities
Yeah.
trying voluntarily to connect to each other but not really having
Right.
the proper means of getting that accomplished.
And your university is somewhat unique in having 50% of your students, undergraduate students at least, going abroad, but most universities are still at that model of 97% of the students staying at home.
Mhm.
And so for any students, whether it's the other 50% or not, that integration seems to me to be critical if you're going to talk about, if internationalization is important, is it also not important on the domestic campus for those who are never leaving?
Right. Yes, and this is another point, I think, in which my university is somewhat different from some others, in that we have the School of International Affairs. As I mentioned, we have 10 schools. Every one of them has its own energy and expertise around
Right.
doing things international. It varies a lot. It's very uneven in different schools. I have colleagues in some schools who really mirror my work and are the central person within that school who does the outbound and the inbound and
Right.
connects with the work that I do, and it's a very sturdy, strong, and fluid ecosystem. Other schools are still very much on the individualistic internationalization
Right.
mode, and there are 10 or 15 people that I'm trying to keep an eye on and understand how to support them and help them, but there's no central backbone. Or if there is within that school, it's totally focused on one thing.
Right.
However, that richness also creates a huge array of courses. There are probably 60 courses about China on my campus, right? There are probably 20 courses that would teach you some of the history of Pakistan and the surrounding countries.
Right.
There are researchers doing, I learn something every day because there are so many researchers, so many institutes, so many things going on that are focused on something international.
Right.
So the advantage of this is that part of the comprehensive is not a worry. There's a huge ecosystem of things that students can access to learn on campus about what's international, and the city provides them with even more opportunities like that. The downside of that is that everybody thinks they've already got it done.
Right.
Everybody believes that there isn't anything to discuss.
Right.
And so when you peek at particular schools, and I'll try not to single anybody out, but I have one school where I asked about internationalization within the curriculum. And the response that I got was, have you seen how international our faculty is? And I said, I have. Have you looked at your curriculum? Have you seen how international our student body is? Yes. Have you looked at your curriculum? There's not an imperative to do it.
Right.
And so particularly in technical fields, there is often still a surprising, I can't call it provincialism because science isn't provincial, but a surprising assumption that, that the way we've always done it is adequate, and that's why all these people come to us here.
Right.
And this is changing, partly because we are going through generations of recruiting faculty who come from other parts of the world who do understand that culture makes a difference even in science.
And we are experiencing some challenges potentially
Yes.
in international recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely right, huge. So I think these things are coming home to people, but when you ask about curriculum, I have it better than most and worse than most. That is, it's all there, there's a lot there, it's huge and rich and wonderful, but having the conversation about what might we do next
Right.
is very hard because
Right.
there's an entrenched feeling of we've got this.
Yeah, right. This is how it is.
This is, we're on this, I don't know what we're talking about.
Right. Well, you have developed baccalaureate programs that are global in dimension, have you not,
Yes,
across
yes,
the
yes.
curriculum?
This has been a very exciting, development. It's taken quite some time because it's not, one of the features of this program is that it's interdisciplinary.
Mhm.
3 undergraduate schools are participating and feeding students into the program.
Which 3 are?
They are business, arts and sciences, and international affairs.
Okay.
So faculty and deans from those 3 schools have been sitting together to find a way to give our students 3 full semesters or experiences abroad, to take the 1 semester abroad model and really magnify it. And the way we've done it is we select students who are already freshmen with us. As sophomores, they are now part of a 30-person cohort that is in this program called the Global Bachelor's Program. They are going to earn their degrees in the 3 schools, business or international affairs or arts and sciences, and they come from a number of different departments. They go as a cohort in the first semester that they are participating in the program, which is the current semester, spring. They all go to Fudan University in Shanghai with a GW professor of economics. And they take a number of courses across the university while they're in China. They take Chinese, some of them they're at various levels for their language. But subsequently, these students will fan out to do either a substantial internship and then another semester abroad, or 2 additional semesters abroad. I've been working very closely with these students. It's been a joy. And some of them have said to me, don't count my internship because I want the internship and 2 more semesters abroad. They're
Right.
very eager to do as much internationally as they can. The requirement is that they, when their semester in China is over, that they go to a different continent. That is, we want them to spend time.
So the idea of global is real.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
doing comparative
Right. So
studies.
some of these students will go to Latin America after China. Some of them will go to Europe. Some of them will go to some other part of, they can go to another part of Asia, but it can't be a Chinese part of Asia. So they will fan out to all kinds of situations, and they are also connected with 3 one-credit courses taught by our faculty that keep that group in connection with each other as they go. So they've already taken one credit course that's a preparation course. They will take a second online while they're abroad. They'll take a second course online that will keep them aware of one another wherever they've gone and lead them through some learning that will not only keep them thinking about big issues and global issues and comparative opportunities, but also sort of what does field studies look like? What kinds of things can I do to make sure that I'm integrating with this community? The third of the 1 credit courses they will do back on campus as a capstone, where they're expected to take some thread of research and interest all the way through this experience to their senior year and reflect on it and produce a piece of work of their own.
Right.
So it's a small group. We're working with them very intensively, and the objective in addition to simply doing something for students who really want a robust international education, is to arrive at our own best practice and see what can cascade out of this program to affect the way we do study abroad more generally.
Right.
Because there will be lessons learned and faculty brought in to be involved with this whole program who otherwise might not have gotten involved with what students are doing abroad, and who can bring that knowledge to bear on other students who are not in this small cohort, but who have similar ambitions.
Right.
So I think it will have, over time, I hope it will have a transformative effect on how we think about study abroad and how we go about it and who's involved.
Right, right. And it clearly, the way that I have seen universities transform themselves is through that experience of integration into curriculum, integration through faculty, into allowing faculty to share their own passion, finding vehicles for that.
Yeah.
What about faculty development internationally in general at GWU?
Well, a lot of this, of course, is happening again because there are so many internationalists at work in
Right.
every department that they do have their own networks, and they often don't need much of a nudge from anybody else.
Very different from smaller institutions,
Right.
or more non-DC institutions.
Right. But having said that, there's always more we can do, and
Right.
there are always new things that we need to be doing. And so among the kinds of things that I think have been really exciting to do, one is another program that I initiated a few years ago that I called the Global Humanities Program. I have so many things called global that when I run a search, I have to be sure I don't put that word in because everything comes up.
Right.
But the Global Humanities Program was something that I did with two partner institutions where we set out to talk about why the humanities are important in higher education and why they are different in different international settings, and also how the humanities help us to be better at global thinking. That is, I see the humanities as a place where we learn how different cultures find and meet each other,
Right.
and how they absorb or reject or navigate each other, how they work that through. So many examples within the humanities of different cultures melding and emerging as something new and different. History has examples of it, literature has examples of it, art has examples of it. And so I think of the humanities as great preparation for a global environment and for global work. And so we wanted to talk about these issues. So we had Boğaziçi University in Istanbul that participated with us. We had Al-Aqwayn University in Morocco that participated with us. They came to Washington, met with faculty. One of the things that was really fun about this project was that our faculty were not just humanities faculty, but people who believe in the humanities and who believe that it's important for their work, even if their work is business or engineering or law or medicine. We had a medical researcher who participated in every event.
Right.
They met with us in Washington. We then took that group of faculty and they all gathered again in Istanbul, and then 6 months later we all gathered again in Morocco. And we looked for synergies, and we learned how to talk about the humanities not from our deep expertise, but as people who need to be able to talk across different disciplines and to a more public kind of agenda.
Right.
And that was exciting for all of the participants because they don't get to talk to people in medicine about what they do very often. So it was quite stimulating and very boundary crossing in any number of ways. And as a result, we've had some projects that have lasted. For instance, we have a theater professor who's now been back to Morocco multiple times to lead students in creating their own performances about issues that affect them.
Yeah.
Gender would be one example.
Right.
And so there have been a number of sort of cross-fed opportunities that have come out of this. I'm very eager to repeat that experiment and bring faculty to 2 additional countries.
Right.
Those were very interesting countries, and I think we can expand this. But it was a lesson for me to realize, first of all, how grateful faculty were to have an opportunity to be together across departmental lines.
Right.
And also how grateful they were to have an opportunity to go somewhere and meet other faculty with a structured opportunity to really dig in about issues. And so, and as I said, our faculty are very international, they have their own networks, but this taught me that there are ways that the administration can still structure really fruitful opportunities that they cannot structure for themselves very easily.
I have two observations. One, I work with, in my career, almost every major institution in the United States. And what I have seen, whether it's an internationally oriented one or not, is that there's always appreciation among faculty for help. There's sometimes resistance that there's something to learn.
Right.
But the opportunity to travel is almost no different sometimes in terms of how faculty approach it than students approach it. I mean, it's,
right, exactly.
It's exciting.
And when I did this project, oftentimes in the conversation people would say, we should have students involved in this. And I always was happy to have students at the table in these discussions. But I kept saying we have this huge infrastructure for moving students. We're really good at it. Let's let something be for faculty.
yes.
Let's carve out something that really focuses on faculty, and let's not let it slide back into what we know how to do, what's easy to do. Let's
Very
keep
important.
something that really pushes faculty's opportunities.
Absolutely. The other observation I have is that the humanities have long been under attack in American higher education. And the humanities have actually been, in some ways, although perhaps not intentionally, under attack in study abroad, because there's almost a diminishment of their value, right? You know, in the rush to develop growth in many other areas, technological and other. But it's always struck me that whether you are a nuclear scientist or an English lit major, when you are in another country, whether it's some folks coming here or our folks going there, humanities are a core part of whatever that experience is, period.
Right.
Otherwise, the concept of globalization and actual cultural learning goes out the window.
Right, exactly.
So it's a much more important, and maybe it's a much more important topic in our field than I think is acknowledged.
No, I think you're right. And our field, of course, reflects higher education at large, oftentimes. And one of the things that's happened in higher education, one of the things that's happened in across the world is the notion that applied knowledge and experiential knowledge is truly valuable.
Right.
And that expertise is not. And what I mean by that, what I mean by that is that where sometimes I sort of joke and challenge people by saying, you know, there's a reason why we have faculty who've devoted their entire lives to the study of a particular subject, whether it's a scientific subject, it's a political subject, it's whatever it is, humanities. When we talk about experiential learning as if it is the only thing that is real learning and this other stuff is classroom learning and somehow relegated to a secondary situation, I think we do a real disservice to the universities, to their strengths, to the faculty who develop this expertise very carefully, and to the different modes of learning that exist. I really do not resent or resist experiential learning, but it's got a place within a larger picture.
Right.
And I think that we have backed away from that, sometimes out of a rather narrow kind of marketing motives and impulses to sort of be the place where you're not going to have to study, you can dig right in and be a worker right away. And this sounds good from a certain perspective, but it actually doesn't work. I think we all know that, that the students who graduate with deep learning that comes out of reading, that comes out of discussion, that comes out of listening and absorbing, are the ones who go into applied situations with the most nuance, the most ability to adjust to what's happening around them. And so finding the fit between these two things is really important. And the humanities have partly suffered because they don't have that applied, they don't readily map onto that applied learning world. And it has caused families, for instance, to be very nervous and anxious about what's going to happen to their child if their child decides to study one of these subjects. Even the social sciences are suffering from this. And in fact, I got the idea for the Global Humanities Project from when I was president of AIEA, and I sat on a panel with several university presidents in Asia. Wonderful universities with fabulous research apparatus, out of this world medical schools and engineering schools. And every one of these presidents was out of a science field. And I raised this question about how do you value the humanities on your campus? And it took off into an hour of very passionate defense of the humanities among every one of these university
that's
presidents.
Very interesting.
On the grounds that without these subjects being given the respect and attention and time that they deserve, civil society breaks down.
Right.
They were very concerned that because families in Japan or Australia or China or wherever they were situated, Korea, were pressuring the universities to do science, 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 technology, 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 that they were seeing a kind of, that the skills for being citizens were receding, and that they were very worried about figuring out ways to bring that back. To me, literature is a wonderful way to put something on the table and say, let's see how we can have civil discourse about this object that's here, that's complex and challenging and asks us to give up certain long-held beliefs that we might have, and to stand in someone else's shoes for a minute. So to me, they are a perfect vehicle for developing civil society as well as for helping people navigate difference.
Right.
And every one of these university presidents knew this deeply, but was frustrated with how to bend the arc of history back so that their communities understood and accepted this.
Right.
And it's why I said I'm going to get 3 university presidents and a bunch of faculty to all start talking about why this is valuable and why we continue to do it and why we must continue to do it and what it contributes. So to me, it's a really powerful aspect of what we do that if we give it up, it will be very hard to get it back. Very, very hard. And so we really have to take stock and figure out what that's going to require.
Right. Well, I hope that you're doing some writing about all of this because this is a really interesting project. And it brings us to the present. You have helped to transform an institution, and the institution has helped to transform the field. Both of you, through that institution, have helped to transform the field. I would love for you to conclude our discussion by talking a little bit about the current moment, as you framed it, and about some critical issues you see for us in this field.
Great. Well, as we sit here, you and I are very aware. We're sitting in Washington, D.C., and we're a month into a new administration that has very emphatically and persistently devalued a lot of the things that most of the people in this field care about and the things that make us get up every morning. And in particular, the opportunity for young people to know and experience people from another culture and the value of that, not just that it's something to tolerate, but that it's something to encourage and insist upon. The mobility of people, the freedom of mobility and the freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, all of these things have been spoken of in a surprisingly denigrating way, and I think we were all in shock that that could even happen. So I think universities have a huge challenge ahead of them to make sure that that their value proposition talks about the kinds of things you and I have been talking about, that we talk about civil society, that we talk about where history is headed and what role our public institutions have in making a good outcome because we're not going to stop history and we're not going to stop globalization.
No.
So we need to make sure that people understand how to be responsible in their participation in all of that. So we have to step up our game. We, I think, have been somewhat successful already, even in this short term, in having our position and the reason why we value these things kind of come back into the conversation. So I see some good there. It's, you know, when you have moments that focus the mind, you get things said that you've been taken for granted for some time. So this is good. I think that domestically, we have a number of things that are a concern and that we are going to have to keep our eye on. Access to university is a big one that everybody is thinking about. And it's not unconnected from the ways that we approach internationalization, where you have campuses that shrug off the need to make sure that there's access to their institutions. They may be turning to fill their seats and their population with international students. And so these things are actually in a seesaw together. Mm-hmm. And so, again, to kind of take a responsible approach, we have to pay attention to the need for our own students out of U.S. high schools to get to our campuses and thrive there, even if their parents didn't go to college, even if the cost is beyond their individual family means.
Right.
We have to take all of the measures that we can to keep that going. And I say that partly because I care about those students and making sure that they thrive. But I also say it because I care about the country. And I think that if we have people who are educated on campuses that are well internationalized, then our chances of sliding into a closed society are less.
Right.
And that it is part of our job to fight that tendency by having educated people who wouldn't dream of trying to live in a disconnected country. And I do think that the generations behind me see the world that way. And to them it's completely second nature, and that they won't tolerate having a country that has decided that it can close its borders and close its doors and close its universities to other people. So I have a lot of hope that this will turn around, but we have to keep our voices out there.
I think that your observation is well placed. It's an era where public education itself is not well funded and the funding is disappearing, and where finances for higher ed for domestic students as well as international are becoming ever more critical. But I like the idea that you end on a hopeful note, and I'm grateful for that, just as our field is grateful for the work that you've done. So thank you so much for being here today.
It's been
a pleasure.
Thank you.